The year was 1977. While the world was still processing the echoes of the space race, Brazil was experiencing a period of intense UFO activity, a chapter in its history known as the Wave of 77. Amidst this scenario of skies filled with unexplained lights and reports of official investigations, a small, quiet town in the interior of Rio de Janeiro state would become the epicenter of one of the most detailed and bizarre contacts ever recorded. We are talking about Paddy do Alfariz. For our audience in the United States and around the world, we need to paint the scene. This isn't the vastness of the Amazon or the coastal bustle of Rio de Janeiro that the world knows. Paddy do Alfariz at the time was a mountain retreat about 75 miles from the capital, with just over 10,000 inhabitants. A town of green hills, agriculture, and silence, where the streets were narrow and most residents knew each other by name. It was there, in a place where nothing out of the ordinary ever happened, that a simple man, a house painter named Moacir Elias de França, found himself face to face with the impossible. It wasn't a distant light in the sky. It was a physical, human-like entity standing nearly 10 feet tall. What unfolded on the night of October 31st, 1977 was not just a sighting, but a journey inside a craft, a telepathic conversation, and an event so real it left physical marks on the location. This is the story of an ordinary man who left home to attend a wake and was intercepted by a giant.
Moacir Elias de França, Moacir Baiano, was a 53-year-old man. Born in Paraíba, he had moved to the southeast in search of work, setting down roots in Pati de Alfaris. His life was a portrait of the working class of the time. He supported his wife and their, at the time, 12 children with the sweat of his trade. He used to say he worked by day to be able to have dinner at night. Although his life was hard, Moacir was not a simple-minded man. He was described as intelligent, observant, and had an artistic streak, being a locally award-winning landscape artist. However, he had no prior interest in mysticism or flying saucers. He was known to enjoy a drink occasionally, a detail critics would later use to try and invalidate his experience, but which, as we will see, became irrelevant in the face of the evidence. The afternoon of October 31st, 1977, the eve of All Souls' Day, was proceeding uneventfully. Moacir was at home in his pajamas, watching television in the old Belvedere Mansion, a building on the crest of a hill overlooking the valley. Around 6 p.m., his 18-year-old daughter Monique brought sad news. Professor Cornelius Fernandez, a friend of Moacir's and the director of a local school, had suddenly died of a heart attack. Shaken, Moacir asked his wife to prepare his clothes. He needed to go pay condolences to his friend's family. He got dressed and left the house, plunging into the twilight falling over the hill. He had no idea his life was about to be divided into before and after. Moacir had barely begun to descend the dirt path when something broke the silence of the hill. He heard a firm, male voice, which sounded strangely familiar, calling him by name. "Moacir, I need to speak with you." He turned toward the voice and was instantly blinded. A powerful, dazzling light hit him squarely, forcing him to lower his eyes. As his vision began to recover, he didn't look up. He looked down, and what he saw froze his blood. Before him, on the dirt ground, were 2 feet clad in white, metallic-looking boots that shone like stainless steel. The boots covered hairy, light-haired legs. Slowly, Moacir raised his gaze. The legs went up, dressed in white shorts held by a brown belt. And then he realized something that defied logic. The belt buckle, A metallic disc about 8 inches in diameter was at the level of his own face. Moacir Elias de França was 5 foot 4 inches tall. The being before him was, by his estimate, nearly 10 feet tall. He stared at the figure. It was a man with a muscular body, like a bodybuilder, wearing a tight brown shirt similar to a vest. The face was youthful, rounded, appearing to be about 40 years old, but his skin had the pale color and texture of wax. The hair was blonde, almost white, with a receding hairline. But the eyes were the most frightening. They had no irises. The pupils were enormous, a luminous light blue, and seemed structured by fibrils radiating from the center. When the being opened his mouth, Moacir saw another anomaly. Instead of teeth, it had only 2 smooth plates, upper and lower. Despite the impossible scene, Moacir felt no fear. The giant then extended his arm and placed his right hand on Moacir's right shoulder. In that instant, the painter felt an enormous weight, as if 44 pounds had been added to his body, and thus, linked with the creature, he began to be led down the hill. The descent was steep. The path was a narrow trail carved out by rain where barely one person could walk single file. While Moacir, guided by the giant, stumbled and walked in fits and starts, his companion moved with impossible grace. The being seemed to float beside him, as if gliding on an invisible conveyor belt, unfazed by the rugged terrain. When they reached the bottom of the hill, reality began to distort. A thick, dark fog appeared from nowhere, enveloping them. They walked through it for a few minutes, and when they emerged, the familiar scenery of Pati do Ferreira had vanished. The houses, the road, everything was gone. They were in an open field, and about 50 feet away, the object rested. It was a metallic flying saucer about 50 feet in diameter and 23 feet high, the color of matte aluminum. It was resting on a tripod, 3 metallic legs, each about 10 feet high. The ship appeared to be made of 2 parts, like 2 deep plates joined together but separated by a small gap, giving it the appearance of a giant yo-yo. Through this slit, Moacir could see moving parts. At the top of the dome, a vent released a gas or hot air, which distorted the landscape seen through it. The giant invited Moacir to inspect the underside of the ship. They stopped directly beneath it. The ceiling was so low that the 10-foot-tall being's head was just inches from grazing the base of the saucer. The being then raised his left hand. Immediately, a metal plate on the underside of the ship detached, moving on a hinge downward and transforming into a 4-step ladder. The steps were absurd, designed for his host, with about 2 feet between them. While Moacir had great difficulty climbing them, the giant ascended behind him with total ease.
As soon as he entered, the first sensation was the cold. The air was air-conditioned, icy, and a lettuce-green glow dominated the environment. The floor was covered with an elastic material, like a 4-inch thick foam. It was then that the giant removed his hand from Moacir's shoulder. The painter felt an immediate and profound relief, as if the 44-pound weight that had been pressing on him was instantly removed. The room was circular. In the center, there was a chaise lounge, an anatomical chair, also covered in the same green elastic material. Instead of a visible door, the circular walls had about 12 windows or viewports, each about 10 feet wide by 5 feet high. They were so high that Moacir, at 5'4", could barely reach the bottom edge with his chest. One of the places that should have been a window was in fact a control panel.
It contained about 40 flickering indicators with round and crescent-shaped scales, full of signals and colors. In the middle, a 12-inch hubcap radiated light. Moacir, driven by curiosity, began to move to the left, looking through each viewport. The first showed a gray-blue firmament filled with bright stars. As he looked through the second window, he felt a sudden impact on his body, the unmistakable sensation of accelerated ascent. Luminous bodies passed by at high speed, and Moacir instinctively raised his arm to protect his face. The other windows showed different views of the cosmos, spheres with wide, colorful rings, dull yellow bodies, and others of intense brilliance.
After Moacir inspected the panel and the viewports, the giant invited him, quote, "Let's go to a secret room." At this moment, the communication changed. The words were no longer spoken. They formed directly in Moacir's mind. It was telepathy. They descended a few steps and entered an even colder room. It looked like a laboratory. The walls were filled with shelves, racks, and niches, all displaying containers of various shapes, but all containing a light green-looking liquid. In the center of the room, there was a table that resembled a gynecological or biology examination table, with various contraptions attached to it, all scaled for the giant. Moacir, now communicating mentally, asked what the ship's propulsion method was. The answer was clear. The flying saucer was remotely guided by a base, from a point that was not revealed. Then Moacir asked the crucial question. Why him? Why had he been chosen for this contact? The giant's answer echoed in Moacir's mind, quote, "You were distinguished for this contact because you are endowed with an intelligence different from that of your compatriots." The being explained that Moacir's mind had a special vibration that allowed him to perceive realities beyond the ordinary. When the giant said, quote, "It is time for you to go down," Moacir felt the same sensation as before, but in reverse, an elevator in rapid descent. He doesn't know how it happened, but in an instant, he and the giant were no longer on the ship. They were on the ground, and the flying saucer had disappeared.
Moacir looked around stunned. They were not on the hill. They were in the main square of Patti du Alferes near the railway station. This was exactly where his deceased friend, Professor Cornelio, lived. The giant somehow knew exactly where he was going. In front of the residence, the being said goodbye with a handshake. It was then that Moacir noticed one last bizarre anatomical detail. The back of the giant's fingers on the last two knuckles had pronounced tufts of blonde hair. The being then turned and simply disappeared. No sound, no light. He vanished. Moacir, in a state of shock, entered the house to offer his condolences. The weeping widow informed him that the body had been transferred to the city council chambers in the neighboring town Miguel Pereira. It was only upon leaving the widow's house that Moacir felt something change. He described it as if a thick fog that had been covering his mind had dissipated. The feeling of weight, the semi-hypnotic state, it was all gone. He was waking up. He met another friend, Colonel Villar, who was also going to the wake. During the car ride to Miguel Pereira, Moacir recounted the unbelievable episode he had just experienced. Villar was so distracted by the narrative that he almost got into an accident. Arriving home at 2 a.m., Moacir awoke his wife to tell her about his adventure. She didn't believe him, blamed fatigue or drink, turned over, and went back to sleep. But Moacir, restless, grabbed a notebook and a pencil and spent the rest of the night recording everything, supplementing his account with drawings and sketches of the ship and the being.
Moacir barely slept. The experience was too intense, and the being had hinted at a future reunion. The next morning, November 1st, around 11 a.m., he was still at the kitchen table, bent over his notebook, reviewing his notes. His wife was at the stove, preparing lunch. That's when Moacir heard, right next to him, the unmistakable sound of an iron-legged chair being dragged. He looked up and his heart stopped. The giant from the previous night was there, sitting to his right at the table, watching him in silence. At that exact moment, his wife, noticing nothing at all, picked up a salad bowl and began to walk toward the table, heading straight through the space occupied by the being. Moacir, in a panic, in a gesture of protection or politeness toward his visitor, stood up abruptly to stop his wife. In the movement, he bumped into her and knocked the bowl to the floor. His wife, furious, began to reprimand him for his craziness. In the midst of the couple's argument, Moacir looked at the chair. The giant was gone, as suddenly and silently as he had appeared. Years later, in 1986, investigators from the Brazilian Society for the Study of Flying Saucers, that is, the SBEDV, went to Moacir's house. They brought a magnetometer to measure the 3 iron chairs in the kitchen. 2 of them showed no alterations. The third, exactly the one where Moacir said the giant had sat, showed a clear and unexplained magnetization of 2 Gauss in its steel tubing.
What makes Moacir Baiano's case even more profound is that the 1977 event was not an isolated incident. His entire life was punctuated by phenomena suggesting the giant was right. His mind was indeed different. In 1971, 6 years earlier, during a picnic in Cabo Frio, 155 miles away, Moacir disappeared. The group was at the beach, but at noon, he vanished. He was searched for in hospitals, restaurants, and even the morgue. He only reappeared at 6 p.m., barefoot, terrified, and confused. He reported being transported to a place that was not Cabo Frio, a desert of gray, compact, hot sand that burned his feet. The sky was overcast, without a sun, and the air was thin. In the distance, he saw a cluster of crude houses stuck together, resembling João de Barro, ovenbird nests with round windows. He tried to get closer, but an invisible barrier prevented him from getting within 150 feet. He reappeared hours later, disoriented, at a gas station. As a child in João Pessoa, Paraíba, he saw on the dark beach a massive woman over 8 feet tall, dressed as a bride, who glowed with her own light, dancing on the sand. His mother confirmed the vision, but when his father and other men arrived, she had vanished. He also had visions. In 1952, as a soldier in Rio, sad and penniless, he had a vision of his mother saying, "I won the lottery, I'm sending you money." Days later, the letter with the money arrived. In 1983, he saw his friend Zezinho Toast appear in his living room, saying he would no longer follow his religion. The next day, Moacir learned that Toast had died of a heart attack that very night. The encounter with the giant changed Moacir forever. Following the telepathic recommendations of the being, he, who was known to drink, stopped using alcohol, tobacco, and eating meat. He became an active member of Alcoholics Anonymous, dedicating himself to helping others. The Patti de Alfer's case is a pillar of Brazilian ufology. It is not based solely on one man's account,
but on supporting testimonies like Colonel Villar, who heard the story minutes later, the protagonist's drastic life change, and most importantly, concrete physical evidence, the anomalous magnetism left in the chair. What was that being? A traveler? A biologist? A guard? And what did he see in Moacir Baiano? The story doesn't offer easy answers. It leaves us with the unsettling feeling that reality, like Moacir's wife in the kitchen, might be moving all around us, passing right by us, without us having the right frequency to perceive it. Moacir, for a brief moment, seems to have tuned in to that frequency.
Moacir Baiano's account is a labyrinth. Every detail, the irisless eyes, the hair on the fingers, the nest houses of Cabo Frio, and the magnetic chair is a piece of a puzzle that seems to transcend our understanding of what is real. The giant claimed Moacir was chosen for his different intelligence. What does this differentiation truly mean? Could it be a dormant psychic ability, a sensitivity to other dimensions that most of us have lost? If you had been in the kitchen that day, do you think you would have seen just a man dropping a salad bowl, or would you have seen the giant sitting at the table? What does your intuition tell you about the true nature of this encounter? Leave your theory in the comments below. Alien Cases exists to investigate these frontiers of the impossible. Every like you leave on this video is a signal flare to the algorithm, showing that the serious exploration of mysteries like this must continue. It's the fuel that drives us to go deeper into the next case. Please confirm that you are already subscribed to the channel. For us to continue this work, your like and your subscription are fundamental.